The Cold Toll of Clinton Road. Clinton Road isn't just a stretch of asphalt in West Milford. It is a wound in the earth that refuses to heal. I used to laugh at the legends, the phantom trucks, the druidic temples, the boy beneath the bridge. I thought the darkness was simply the absence of light, a void to be pierced by high beams and rationality. I was wrong. The darkness there has weight. It presses against your ribs, suffocating the logic right out of your skull. I drove onto that cursed pavement a skeptic, armed with arrogance and a single quarter. I didn't know that some tolls aren't paid with currency, but with your sanity. I drove out of those woods, but part of me is still screaming on that bridge, watching a dry coin appear on the seat beside me.
Chapter 1: The Deviation. The GPS glowing on my dashboard was the only anchor to reality I had left. It was a lifeline of bright electric blue cutting through a void of absolute black. It was 11:43 p.m. on a Tuesday in late October, the kind of night where the air in northern New Jersey gets sharp enough to cut the inside of your lungs, smelling of wood smoke and decaying foliage. I was tired, bone tired. The interstate was backed up, a sea of red brake lights stretching toward the horizon, the result of a jackknifed tractor trailer near the Pompton Lakes exit. I didn't have the patience for it. I just wanted to be home, nursing a bourbon, forgetting the mediocrity of my workday. So when the robotic voice of my navigation app chimed, offering a shortcut that would save me 20 minutes, I didn't hesitate. I tapped accept. The blue line rerouted. It pulled me off the well-lit highway and onto a series of diminishing back roads, until I faced a rusted green street sign that caught the glare of my high beams. Clinton Road. I actually laughed, a dry, humorless sound that died instantly in the cabin of my Honda Civic. I knew the stories. Everyone in the tri-state area knew the stories. It was the most haunted road in America, a 10-mile stretch of twisting asphalt winding through the desolate heart of West Milford. It was a buffet of paranormal folklore, phantom pickup trucks, satanic cults performing rituals in the ruins of Cross Castle, alien sightings, and the ghost boy at the bridge. It was the stuff of teenage dares and clickbait YouTube videos. Spooky, I muttered to the empty passenger seat, turning the wheel. The transition was immediate and jarring. The moment my tires crossed the threshold onto Clinton Road, the world changed. It wasn't just that the streetlights vanished, though they did, plunging everything outside the cone of my headlights into an oppressive, inky abyss. It was the weight of the place. The air pressure seemed to drop, popping my ears. The hum of the engine sounded different here, muffled, as if the forest itself was dampening the noise, swallowing it whole. The road was narrow, a ribbon of cracked pavement snaking through dense woods. The trees here were ancient and gnarled, their branches interlocking overhead to form a skeletal canopy that blotted out the moon. With the leaves mostly gone, the bare limbs looked like arthritic fingers clawing at the sky, or perhaps reaching down for the roof of my car.
I drove for 5 minutes, the initial amusement fading into a dull, rhythmic anxiety. My headlights carved a tunnel through the dark. Beyond that illumination, there was nothing. No distant farmhouse lights, no glow from a nearby town, just a wall of black that felt solid, viscous. I glanced at the speedometer. I was doing 40, but it felt faster. The trees whipped by in a blur of gray and brown. Then the radio glitch happened. I had been listening to a classic rock station, the comforting, raspy voice of a DJ talking about the upcoming weather. Suddenly, the signal degraded. It didn't fade out with static like a normal reception loss. It shredded, the audio distorted into a high-pitched screech, violent and digital, before cutting out completely. Silence. "Come on," I hissed, stabbing the seek button. Nothing. The display read no signal. I turned the volume knob down, unnerved by the sudden acoustic void. That was when I noticed the silence wasn't just coming from the speakers. I rolled my window down an inch, needing fresh air. The cold rushed in, biting my face, but it brought no sound with it. No crickets, no rustling of dried leaves in the wind, no nocturnal birds. The woods were dead, or worse, they were holding their breath. A primal alarm bell began to ring in the base of my skull. It was the lizard brain, the evolutionary holdover that told my ancestors when a predator was stalking the tall grass. "You shouldn't be here," it whispered. "You are trespassing." I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. "It's just a road, Mike. Get a grip." But the road seemed to fight back. The curves became sharper, more erratic. The asphalt was uneven, littered with patches of wet leaves that made the tires slip just enough to send a jolt of adrenaline through my chest. Every shadow cast by the high beams looked like a figure darting between the trees. Every reflection in the side mirrors looked like eyes. I checked the rearview mirror. Darkness, just the red glow of my taillights reflecting off the wet tar. But for a split second, I thought I saw headlights way back in the distance. I squinted, 2 distinct orbs of light hovering. I looked back at the road ahead to navigate a sharp turn, then checked the mirror again. Gone. "Just nerves," I said aloud. My voice sounded thin, fragile in the enclosed space. The GPS indicated a sharp curve ahead, Dead Man's Curve, the location of the bridge.
The legend cycled through my mind unbidden. Stop on the bridge. Throw a coin in the water. The ghost boy throws it back. It was ridiculous, a campfire story. But as the icon on my dashboard drew closer to that hairpin turn, a strange compulsion took root in my chest. It wasn't curiosity exactly. It was more like a challenge. The atmosphere of this place was bullying me, making me feel small and hunted. I wanted to push back. I wanted to prove that this was just dirt, wood, and asphalt. I wanted to assert my reality over this suffocating superstition. I saw the guardrails first, old rusted metal reflecting the twin beams of my car. Then the bridge itself, a short span over a brook that was swallowed by the night. The water below would be black, icy, and deep. I shouldn't stop. The logical part of my brain screamed it. Just drive. Get to Route 23. Go home. But my foot was already hovering over the brake pedal. The car slowed. The tires crunched over debris. The silence of the wood seemed to amplify, pressing against the glass like a physical weight. I came to a halt, right in the center of the bridge. The engine idled, a low purr that did nothing to chase away the dread. I sat there for a moment, staring into the tunnel of light ahead, waiting for something. A maniac with an axe? A ghost truck? Nothing happened. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "See?" I whispered. Nothing. My hand moved to the center console. My fingers brushed against the cold metal of a quarter. "Do it," the urge whispered. "Prove it's a lie." I grabbed the coin. It felt heavy, substantial. I looked at the passenger window. Beyond the glass, the darkness was absolute. It felt like looking into the pupil of a giant eye. I pressed the button. The window motor whined, a mechanical intrusion in the stillness. The glass slid down. The smell hit me instantly. Not just the cold autumn air anymore. This was distinct. It smelled of stagnant water, wet wool, and something sweet, like flowers left too long on a grave. I shivered, the cold seeping into the marrow of my bones. I held the coin out into the night air. My hand was shaking. "Here goes nothing,"
I murmured. I flicked my wrist. The coin tumbled into the blackness.
Chapter 2: The Toll Paid. The splash was clearer than it had any right to be. It wasn't the dull plunk of a small metal disc hitting deep, murky water. It was a sharp, crisp slap, echoing off the stone embankments below like a gunshot in a library. It reverberated up through the rotting wooden planks of the bridge, hanging in the freezing air long after the ripple should have faded. I sat there, hand still suspended near the open window, fingers curled as if I could snatch the coin back. 1 second passed. 2. I let out a shaky breath, watching a plume of white fog materialize from my lips and dissipate against the dashboard. "There," I whispered, my voice sounding strained. "There. Gravity works. Physics works. Happy now?" I was talking to the woods, to the dark, to the childish part of my brain that had demanded this ritual. I waited for the validation of silence, for the world to settle back into the mundane rhythm of a tired man driving home. But the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy. It felt expectant. I reached for the window switch to seal the cabin against the encroaching cold. My finger hovered over the button. Ting. The sound came from inside the car. My heart hammered a violent rhythm against my ribs. I froze, my hand retracting as if burned. The sound had been light, metallic, the distinct acoustic signature of a coin hitting upholstery. Slowly, fighting the stiffness in my neck, I turned my head toward the passenger seat. Lying in the center of the dark fabric, illuminated by the ghostly green glow of the dashboard lights, was a quarter. My mouth went dry, tasting of copper and fear. "No," I muttered. I must have dropped another one. That was the only logical explanation. I had fumbled. I had pulled out 2 coins, thrown one, and dropped the other. It was a simple, clumsy mistake. I reached out. My hand was trembling so badly I could barely control my fingers. I picked up the coin. It wasn't just a quarter. It was the same quarter. I knew it because I had rubbed my thumb over the date. 1994. Before I threw it, I saw the date now, gleaming mockingly at me. But that wasn't what made the bile rise in my throat. The coin was dry, bone dry. It was also warm, not the biting cold of the outside air, and not the icy chill of the stream below. It was room temperature, as if it had been sitting in someone's pocket, as if it had been held in a closed fist, waiting to be returned. I dropped it.
"Okay," I said, the word coming out as a strangled wheeze. "Okay, we're leaving." I grabbed the gear shift, my palms slick with sweat. I went to shift into drive, but my eyes betrayed me. They flicked upward, drawn by a magnetic pull I couldn't resist, toward the rear-view mirror. The breath was knocked out of me. Standing directly behind my car, bathed in the crimson wash of my taillights, was a figure. It was a boy. He couldn't have been more than 10 years old. He was small, frail-looking, wearing clothes that belonged in a sepia-toned photograph, a woolen newsboy cap, suspenders, knickers that ended at the knee. He was standing perfectly still in the middle of the bridge,
his hands hanging limp at his sides. But he wasn't just standing there. He was dripping. Water poured off him in sheets. It ran from the brim of his cap, soaked through his woolen shirt, and pooled around his boots on the asphalt. The water was dark, thick, like oil. I blinked hard, sure that when I opened my eyes he would be gone. A trick of the light, pareidolia. I opened them. He was still there. But now his head was tilted up. Under the shadow of the cap, his skin was the color of curdled milk. It possessed a luminous, sickly pallor that seemed to absorb the red light of the tail lamps rather than reflect it. And his eyes, there were no whites, no irises, just two voids of obsidian blackness staring directly into the mirror, directly at me. Jesus Christ, I screamed, the sound tearing at my throat. I spun in my seat, whipping my head around to look out the rear window, needing to see him with my own eyes, not through the reflection. The bridge behind me was empty. Just the cracked asphalt, the rusted guardrails, and the oppressive tunnel trees. No boy, no water. I let out a hysterical, jagged laugh. It's a hallucination, I panted, facing forward again, gripping the wheel until my knuckles popped. You're losing it, Mike. I looked at the mirror again to reassure myself. The scream died in my chest, blocked by a wall of pure terror. He was back, and he was closer. He was no longer at the edge of the bridge. He was right at my bumper. I could see the texture of the wet wool on his chest. I could see the way the black water ran down his pale cheeks like tears of ink. He wasn't walking. His legs weren't moving.
His arms were still limp at his sides. He was sliding. It was a glitch in reality, a stutter in the film reel of the world. He simply advanced, smooth and frictionless, as if gravity and friction were laws he had long ago ceased to obey. The car temperature plummeted. It wasn't a gradual cool down. It was an instant vacuum of heat. My breath began to fog violently, obscuring the windshield. Then came the smell. It invaded the vents, overpowering the scent of my air freshener. It was the stench of a riverbed disturbed after a century, rotting vegetation, fish bellies, wet earth, and something sweeter, more cloying, the smell of old lilies. Get out, now. I slammed my foot onto the gas pedal. The tires spun on the wet leaves, screeching in protest, the engine roaring a high-pitched whine. The car fishtailed slightly, the rear end swinging toward the guardrail, toward the drop. Move, damn it, I shrieked. The tires copped to pavement. The Civic lurched forward, shooting off the wooden bridge and back onto the twisting asphalt of Clinton Road. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I kept my eyes locked on the narrow cone of my headlights, driving way too fast for the winding road. Trees blurred into a single gray wall. I took corners at speeds that make the chassis groan, desperate to put miles between me and that bridge. It's over, I told myself. You're moving. He's standing still. You're leaving him behind. I glanced at the speedometer. 50, 60. I was outrunning him. I had to be. But the cold didn't leave. The frost on the inside of the windshield was spreading, crystallizing in intricate fern-like patterns that clawed their way toward the center of my vision. I blasted the defroster, but the air blowing out was ice cold. A sudden, terrible thought struck me, a feeling of proximity so intense it made the hair on my arm stand up like wire. I slowly lifted my eyes to the rearview mirror one more time. The road behind me was empty. The red taillights illuminated nothing but asphalt and trees. Relief washed over me,
so potent it almost made me dizzy. I slumped slightly in the seat. "Gone," I whispered. "He's gone." Then the rear window fogged up, not from the cold outside, from the inside. A patch of condensation bloomed on the rear glass right behind the headrest of the back seat. It grew rapidly, opaque and white, and then a shape pressed against it. A handprint, small, child-sized, then another.
They were pressing against the glass from the back seat. My heart stopped. The silence of the woods was gone, replaced by the roar of blood in my ears and a sound that came from directly behind my head. Drip, drip, drip. The sound of water hitting the floor mats. I wasn't alone in the car.
Chapter 3: The Passenger. The realization didn't hit me like a wave. It hit me like a car crash. The kind where the airbags deploy and the world spins into a silent, chaotic blur before the pain sets in. Drip, drip. The sound was wet and heavy, soaking into the fabric of the back seat. It was the sound of something saturated, something dredged up from the bottom of a lake, sitting where no one should be. I couldn't look. If I looked in the rearview mirror and saw those hollow black eyes staring back at me from the back seat, I knew with absolute certainty that I would drive straight into a tree. My mind would simply snap. "Don't look," I whispered through chattering teeth. "Just drive. Just get out." But the car felt different now. It felt heavier. The suspension groaned over every bump in the road, as if I were hauling dead weight. The steering wheel felt sluggish in my hands, fighting my inputs, pulling subtly to the left, toward the deep woods, toward the water. And the cold, God, the cold. It wasn't just the ambient temperature dropping. It was a localized, biting frost that radiated from the back seat, crawling up my spine, numbing the base of my neck. My breath was coming in short, panicked clouds of vapor that obscured the windshield faster than the defroster could clear them. I reached out with a trembling hand to wipe the glass, my fingers leaving streaks in the condensation. That was when the radio came back on. There was no static this time, no gradual fade in. It simply exploded into life at maximum volume. But it wasn't music. It wasn't the DJ. It was water. The sound of rushing water, violent and churning, filled the cabin. It sounded like being underwater in a turbulent river, the roar of the current deafening, pressing in on all sides. I screamed and slapped at the volume knob, twisting it frantically to the left. Nothing happened. The knob spun uselessly in my fingers. Then, beneath the roar of the water, a voice emerged. It was faint at first, buried under the digital distortion of the speakers, but it grew clearer, sharper. It wasn't a human voice. It sounded wet, gurgling, as if the speaker's throat were full of fluid. "Cold." The word hissed through the speakers, terrifying. "So cold." I slammed my fist against the power button. The display flickered, the green light dimming for a second, but the sound didn't stop. If anything, it got louder. "You took my place." The whisper seemed to move. It wasn't just coming from the speakers anymore. It was coming from behind my right ear. I swerved. The car drifted across the double yellow line, tires screeching on the damp asphalt. I corrected hard, fighting the wheel, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Leave me alone," I shouted, my voice cracking. "I didn't do anything. It was just a coin. I just threw a coin." The response was immediate. The passenger seatbelt alarm began to chime.
The red icon on the dashboard flashed rhythmically. Someone or something was sitting in the passenger seat now. I didn't want to look. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to keep my eyes locked on the road ahead, on the tunnel of light carving through the darkness. But the presence beside me was undeniable. The air pressure had shifted, the seat creaked, the leather groaning under a new weight. I turned my head, just a fraction, just enough to see out of the corner of my eye. The seat was empty, but the seatbelt was buckled. I stared at it, my brain trying to process the impossibility. The strap was pulled taut across nothing, stretching over an invisible form. The buckle was clicked securely into the receiver. And on the seat cushion, a dark stain was spreading. Water. It was soaking into the gray fabric, expanding outward from the center of the seat like a blooming flower of rot. "No," I whimpered. "This isn't real." Ding, ding, ding. The chime grew faster, more urgent. Then the radio cut out. The rushing water sound vanished instantly, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. In that silence, I heard it. Breathing. It was wet, rattling, labored breathing. The sound of lungs fighting against fluid. It was coming from the empty seat beside me. "Turn here," a voice whispered. It was a child's voice, clear, commanding, right next to me. I looked at the road. Ahead, the asphalt curved sharply to the right, but to the left, there was a dirt track, barely visible, overgrown with weeds and shadowed by looming pines. "Turn here," the voice repeated, louder this time. "Take me home." My hands jerked the wheels right, following the main road. "No," I yelled, "I'm not going anywhere with you." The moment I refused, the car reacted.
The headlights flickered and died. Total darkness. I was doing 50 miles an hour on a winding forest road in pitch blackness. I slammed on the brakes, the tires locked up, skidding on the wet leaves. The car slid sideways, the rear end swinging out. I felt the sickening lurch of losing control, the suspension bouncing violently as we left the pavement and hit the gravel shoulder. The world was a chaotic tumble of motion and noise, gravel spraying, branches whipping against the metal, the engine roaring. Then, impact. The front bumper slammed into something solid, a guardrail or a tree stump. The airbag didn't deploy, but the seatbelt locked hard against my chest, knocking the wind out of me. My head snapped forward, then back against the headrest. Silence returned. I sat there, gasping for air, my hands gripping the wheel so hard my fingers were numb. The engine had stalled. The dashboard lights were dead. Outside, the forest was an impenetrable wall of black. I was alive. The car had stopped. But I was still in Clinton Road, and I wasn't alone. Slowly, agonizingly, the dashboard lights flickered back to life. A dim, sickly green glow illuminated the cabin. I looked at the passenger seat. The seatbelt was unbuckled now. The strap hung loose against the door pillar. But the wet stain on the seat was gone. Instead, there were footprints on the dashboard. Small, muddy footprints. They started on the seat, stepped onto the glove compartment, and then onto the dash itself. They were facing the windshield, as if whatever had been sitting there had climbed out through the glass. No, the windshield was intact. I fumbled for the door handle, desperate to get out, to run, to take my chances with the bears and the gold, rather than stay in this metal coffin. But the door wouldn't open. I pulled the handle, shoved my shoulder against it. Locked. Jammed. I tried the window. Dead.
I was trapped. And then, a sound from outside. Tap, tap, tap. On the hood of the car. I looked up. The headlights flickered back on, dim and yellow, buzzing with electrical failure. Standing on the hood of my car, illuminated from below by the weak beams, was the boy. He was crouching, his pale, wet face, inches from the windshield. His black eyes were wide, unblinking, staring directly into mine. His mouth was open in a silent scream, revealing rows of small, gray teeth. He raised a hand. It was dripping with that black, oily water.
He pressed his palm against the glass. Squeak. He dragged his fingers down the windshield, leaving 5 long, muddy streaks that looked like claw marks. Then he spoke. I couldn't hear it through the glass, but I saw his lips move. I saw the shape of the words. You owe me. The car engine roared to life on its own. I hadn't touched the key. My feet were on the floor mat, nowhere near the pedals. The gear shift slammed into reverse with a mechanical crunch that sounded like breaking bone. The car lurched backward, spinning tires on the gravel, pulling away from the tree line, back onto the road. I grabbed the wheel, trying to steer, trying to regain control, but the wheel was locked rigid. The car spun 180 degrees, facing back the way I had come, back toward the bridge. Then it shifted into drive, and the gas pedal floored itself.
Chapter 4: The Iron Coffin. The sensation of the gas pedal depressing under my hovering foot was the most violating feeling I had ever experienced. It was a phantom limb, a mechanical intrusion that severed the connection between my brain and the machine. I stomped on the brake with both feet, putting my entire body weight into the desperate motion. The pedal was a brick. It didn't budge a millimeter. My Honda Civic, usually a tame commuter vessel, roared with a predatory aggression I didn't know it possessed. The engine redlined, the tachometer needle burying itself in the red zone as we tore back down the twisting throat of Clinton Road. "Stop! God damn it, stop!" I screamed, slamming my fists against the steering wheel. The wheel snapped in my grip, jerking violently to the left to navigate a sharp bend. The force nearly broke my wrists. I let go, pulling my hands to my chest, watching in horror as the car drove itself. It took the curve with impossible precision, tires shrieking against the damp asphalt, maintaining a speed that should have sent us careening into the pines. We were heading back to the bridge. The dashboard lights flickered, a strobe effect of sickly greens and dying oranges. The digital clock raced forward, the numbers blurring. 12, 15, 12, 30. Time was unraveling inside the cabin. Then came the water. It started as a seepage, a cold, dark liquid bubbling up through the floor mats like crude oil. I felt it soak through the soles of my sneakers, an icy shock that made me gasp. I looked down. The floor of the car was flooding. "What is this?" I choked out, scrambling to lift my feet, pressing my back against the driver's seat. The water rose fast. It wasn't clean rain. It was the muck of the creek. It smelled of sulfur and dead fish, a thick, cloying stench that coated the back of my throat. It swirled around the pedals, black and opaque, rising to my ankles within seconds. The radio static coalesced again, cutting through the roar of the engine. Cold. The voice was everywhere now. It wasn't just in the speakers. It was vibrating in the chassis, humming in the glass. Dark. I grabbed the door handle again, yanking it until the plastic threatened to snap. Locked. I pounded on the window. "Help! Somebody!"
But there was nobody. Just the trees. The endless, witnessing trees rushing by in a blur of gray. The car accelerated. We were doing 70 now.
The headlights cut a frantic path through the darkness, illuminating the familiar landmarks in reverse order. The old stone furnace, the twisted guardrail. The water was at my shins. It was freezing, numbing my legs. I reached for the emergency brake, the mechanical lever in the center console. It was my last hope. If I could rip it up, maybe I could spin the car, stall the engine, crash us into a ditch, anything but going back to that bridge. My hand closed around the leather grip. Pain exploded in my palm. I screamed and recoiled. The handle was freezing, not just cold, but liquid nitrogen cold. It burned the skin instantly. I looked at my hand. The flesh was white, blistered with frostbite. "Please," I sobbed, the fight draining out of me as the terror took hold. "What do you want?" The radio went silent. The engine noise dropped to a low, menacing hum. The car began to slow down. We were approaching Dead Man's Curve. The headlights swept across the rusted metal of the bridge's guardrails. The wooden planks of the bridge deck came into view, looking like the ribs of some massive buried skeleton. The car didn't stop at the edge. It rolled forward, the tires thumping rhythmically over the wood. Thump, 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 thump. It crawled to the exact center of the bridge, the exact spot where I had stopped before. Then the engine cut. The lights died. Absolute darkness swallowed me. The silence returned, heavier than before. The only sound was the water inside the car, sloshing gently against the doors, now up to my knees. It was heavy, viscous fluid. I sat there, trembling, my breath coming in short, jagged rasps. I couldn't see my own hands in front of my face. "I brought it back," I whispered into the dark, my voice trembling. "I brought the coin back. You can have it. Just let me go." Click. The sound was deafening in the silence. It was the sound of the power locks disengaging. Hope, sharp and painful, spiked in my chest. I reached for the door handle. But before I could pull it, the driver's side window began to roll down. Whirr. The electric motor groaned. The glass slid into the door panel, exposing me to the night air. But the air wasn't empty. A face was hanging upside down in the open window frame. It was him, the boy. He was hanging from the roof of the car, his face level with mine. His skin was translucent, glowing with a faint necrotic luminescence. His hair hung down in wet, matted strands.
Dripping that black water onto my shoulder. His eyes were inches from mine, those terrible, void-like eyes. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I was paralyzed by a primal fear that locked every muscle in my body. He opened his mouth. It was filled with black water. "You gave me a token," he whispered. His voice didn't come from his throat. It resonated directly inside my skull. "A payment." I shook my head slightly, tears freezing on my cheeks. I didn't mean to. It was a joke. "A toll is a toll," he said. He reached a hand into the car. His fingers were long, skeletal, and dripping. He reached toward my chest. I tried to shrink back, but the seat held me fast. He didn't touch my skin. He reached into the breast pocket of my jacket. He pulled out my wallet. With slow, deliberate movements, he opened it. He pulled out my driver's license. He held it up to his face, studying it with those dead eyes. "Michael," he read. He looked back at me. A smile cracked his pale face, a jagged, unnatural expression that stretched too wide. "Michael is done," he said. He dropped the license into the black water pooling at my knees. "Now," he hissed, "we trade." The water in the car surged. It wasn't rising anymore. It was alive. It grabbed my legs.
I felt cold, slimy hands wrapping around my ankles, pulling me down. No, I kicked, splashing the foul water, but the grip was iron tight. The boy swung down from the roof, his body defying gravity as he slid through the open window and into the car. He landed on my lap. He was heavy, impossibly heavy, like a sack of wet sand. The cold radiating from him burned through my clothes. He placed his hands on the steering wheel. "You drive," he whispered, "but I steer." The engine roared to life again. The headlights blazed on, but they weren't white anymore. They were red, blood red. They illuminated the woods ahead, turning the trees into pillars of meat and bone. The boy laughed, a wet, gurgling sound. He stomped his foot down on my foot, forcing the gas pedal to the floor. The car shot forward, off the bridge, and deeper into the dark.
Chapter 5: The Veins of the Earth. The weight on my lap was crushing, a density that defied physics. It wasn't just the weight of a child, it was the weight of a headstone, of waterlogged timber, of 60 years of silt and neglect. The boy sat straddling my thighs, his back pressed against my chest. The cold radiating from him was a physical assault, a jagged frost that pierced through my jacket, my shirt, and into the skin of my torso. I could feel his spine, sharp and knobby, digging into my sternum like a row of frozen knuckles. "Let go," I gasped, my breath visible in the red-washed cabin. "You're killing me." He didn't answer. He just laughed, a wet, bubbling sound that sprayed droplets of black fluid onto the dashboard. His small, corpse-white hands gripped the steering wheel at 10 and 2, locking it in place with a strength that felt industrial. We were tearing down Clinton Road at 80 miles an hour. The headlights, now twin beams of arterial crimson, transformed the familiar world into a nightmarish abattoir. The trees weren't brown and gray anymore. They were glistening pillars of meat and sinew, pulsing in the strobe light flicker of the failing electrical system. The road itself looked like a scar, a black wound stitched together by the yellow lines. I tried to lift my foot, to pull it away from the gas pedal, but the boy's boot was clamped over mine. It felt like an anvil. He pressed down harder, urging the engine into a high-pitched scream that sounded less like machinery and more like a dying animal. "Faster," the boy whispered. The voice didn't come from his mouth. It vibrated through his back and into my chest, resonating in my own lungs. "Who?" I choked out, grabbing his wrists, trying to pry his hands off the wheel. His skin was slick with slime. My fingers slipped uselessly over his forearms. They were hard as iron, immovable. "The Keeper," he repeated. Then I saw it in the rearview mirror. Lights. Blinding, searing white lights. They appeared out of nowhere, cresting the hill behind us like a sudden sunrise. But they were too high off the ground to be a car. They were wide-set, aggressive, and mounting in intensity with every second. A truck, the legendary phantom pickup of Clinton Road. But this wasn't a legend, this was a predator. The truck roared, a sound that shook the chassis of my Civic. It was closing the distance at an impossible speed. "He wants the toll, too," the boy hissed, jerking the wheel to the left. My car swerved violently, crossing the double yellow line. The tires shrieked, losing traction on the wet leaves. We drifted sideways, the passenger door nearly clipping a telephone pole that looked like a charred bone standing upright in the mud. The truck didn't brake, it accelerated. Wham! The impact threw my head back against the headrest. The truck had rammed my bumper. The sound of crunching metal and shattering plastic filled the cabin. The trunk popped open, flapping wildly like a broken wing, obstructing the view of the monster behind us. "Drive!" I screamed, terrified beyond reason. "It's going to crush us."
I am driving, the boy said calmly. We have to go off-road. What? No, there's no road. There is for us. He yanked the wheel hard to the right. We left the pavement. The car launched off the shoulder, smashing through a dense thicket of brush. Branches whipped against the windshield, cracking the glass in spiderweb patterns. The suspension bottomed out with a sickening metallic clunk as we hit the uneven forest floor. We were careening through the woods now, bouncing violently over roots and rocks. The red headlights illuminated a path that shouldn't have been there, a narrow, overgrown trail that wound deeper into the dark heart of the forest. The water inside the car sloshed violently, rising to my waist. It was freezing, numbing my legs entirely. I could feel things swimming in it, small, frantic movements brushing against my thighs. Minnows? Tadpoles? Or fingers? Where are you taking me? I yelled over the roar of the engine and the snapping of timber. To the castle, the boy said. To the exchange. Cross Castle. I knew the stories. An old stone ruin deep in the woods, built by a man who went mad, supposedly a site for satanic rituals and gatherings of the occult. It had been demolished years ago by the Park Service, reduced to foundations and rubble. But in the red light of my headlights, as we burst through a final line of trees, I saw that the stories were wrong. It wasn't demolished. It was waiting. Ahead, looming out of the darkness like a festering sore on the landscape, stood the ruins. But they weren't just piles of stone.
The walls were jagged, reaching up like broken teeth. The windows were gaping maws, glowing with a faint, sickly purple luminescence from within. The boy stomped on the brake. The car skidded through the mud, sliding sideways until we slammed into a crumbling stone wall. The airbag finally deployed, a white explosion of dust and nylon that hit the boy in the face. He didn't flinch. He didn't blink. The bag deflated instantly, hissing as it melted against his freezing skin. The engine died. The red headlights cut out. We were plunged into darkness, save for the purple glow emanating from the castle ruins and the blinding white beams of the truck, which had stopped at the tree line behind us. The truck sat there, idling. Its engine growled, a low-frequency rumble that rattled my teeth. It was blocking the exit, hurting us. "Get out," the boy commanded. He opened the driver's side door. The black water from inside the car poured out in a torrent, splashing onto the muddy ground. He slid off my lap, moving with that uncanny, frictionless grace. He stood in the mud, staring at me. "My legs," I whispered. "I can't feel my legs." I tried to move them, but they were dead weight. The cold had paralyzed the nerves. "You don't need them," the boy said. "You're not walking out of here." He reached in, grabbed my collar, and pulled. He was small, frail-looking, but his strength was absolute. He dragged me out of the car like a rag doll. I hit the mud face first, the taste of iron and rot filling my mouth. I clawed at the ground, trying to pull myself away, but my fingers just sank into the wet earth. The soil felt wrong. It wasn't dirt. It pulsated. It felt like flesh. The boy grabbed my ankle and began to drag me toward the castle entrance. "Please," I begged, tears streaming down my face, mixing with the mud. "Take the car, take the money, take anything." He stopped and looked down at me. The purple light from the ruins caught his face, highlighting the veins beneath his translucent skin. They were black, branching out like cracks in porcelain. "You don't understand, Michael," he said softly. "The coin wasn't payment. It was a contract." He pointed to the towering stone archway of the castle. "You invited the road in, and now the road needs a new vessel." He turned and continued dragging me. My paralyzed legs trailed uselessly behind, bumping over stones that felt disturbingly like skulls half buried in the earth. From the tree line,
The truck revved its engine, once, twice, as if cheering us on.
We crossed the threshold of the castle ruins. The air inside was different. It wasn't cold. It was humid, thick, and smelled of copper, the distinct metallic tang of fresh blood. And in the center of the roofless main hall, surrounded by crumbling walls, was a hole, a well. It was perfectly round, lined with mossy stones, and from deep within it, a sound echoed up. Not wind, not water. Voices, hundreds of them, whispering. "He's here," the boy called out to the hole. "I brought him." The whispers stopped. Then a single voice rose from the depths, booming and ancient. "Is he hollow?" The boy looked at me, his black eyes devoid of pity. "He is now."
He is now. The boy's words hung in the humid air of the ruin, heavy and final, like the lid of a coffin slamming shut. I lay in the mud, my lower body useless, a dead weight dragging behind me. The paralysis wasn't just a lack of sensation anymore. It was a physical transformation. My legs felt calcified, heavy as stone pillars, anchoring me to the cursed earth of Cross Castle. The purple light emanating from the well pulsed rhythmically, syncing with the throbbing pain in my temples. It wasn't a soft glow, it was a bruised, sickly luminescence that cast long, distorted shadows against the crumbling stone walls. I looked up at the boy. He stood over me, his small frame silhouetted against the jagged masonry. The water dripping from his clothes had stopped pooling. Instead, it seemed to be absorbing into the ground, feeding the very soil I was pinned to. "What does that mean?" I wheezed, the taste of copper and bile thick in my throat. "What do you mean, hollow?" The boy didn't answer. He turned his back to me and faced the well. The hole in the ground was jagged, framed by moss-slicked stones that looked like old teeth. From its depths, the whispering had returned, a cacophony of hushed voices overlapping, arguing, pleading. It sounded like a radio tuned to a frequency of the dead. "Bring him to the lip," the voice from the well boomed again. It wasn't just loud, it vibrated in the marrow of my bones. It sounded like grinding tectonic plates. The boy nodded. He reached down, gripping my collar with those iron-strong, icy fingers. "No," I shouted, thrashing my upper body. I clawed at the mud, digging my fingernails into the wet earth until they bled, trying to find purchase, trying to drag myself away. "I won't go. I won't." But resistance was a joke. With a terrifying lack of effort, the boy hauled me forward. My paralyzed legs scraped over the debris, broken glass, sharp rocks, rusted beer cans left by teenagers decades ago. I felt the impacts, dull and distant, like they were happening to someone else's body. He dragged me to the very edge of the abyss. He dropped me. My head hung over the precipice. I stared down into the well. There was no water at the bottom, only a thick swirling sog, blacker than the night outside. It churned and roiled, forming shapes that dissolved as quickly as they appeared. Faces, hands, screaming mouths.
"Look," the voice commanded. I didn't want to. I tried to squeeze my eyes shut. But a force, invisible, cold and mental, pried my eyelids open. I was forced to stare into the void, and the void stared back. Two massive, pale orbs materialized in the black fog. Eyes. They were ancient, milky with cataracts, yet burning with a predatory intelligence. They were the size of dinner plates. "Michael," the voice rumbled. "You came uninvited. You offered tribute. You opened the door." "I didn't know," I screamed into the pit. "It was a quarter. It was just a stupid legend." "Belief is not required for the trap to spring," the voice intoned. "Only action. You paid the toll. You bought the ride." The boy knelt beside my head. He looked down at me, his expression unreadable. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something in his obsidian eyes. Not pity, exhaustion. "I've been here a long time, Michael," the boy whispered. His voice was no longer overlapping with the monsters. It was small, human. "Since 1957, I fell off the bridge. I drowned in the dark, and it caught me." He gestured to the pit. "The road needs a face, Michael. It needs a voice. It needs someone to collect the tolls, someone to drive the cars, someone to keep the stories alive." He touched his own chest. "I'm full," he said. "I'm full of the water. I'm full of the cold. I can't hold anymore." He placed his hand on my forehead. The cold was agonizing, like a block of dry ice pressed against my skull. "But you," he smiled, a gruesome stretching of pale skin. "You are empty. You have no faith, no demons. You're just a man driving through the woods alone. You are a perfect vessel." "No," I whimpered. "Please. I have a life. I have a family." "Not anymore," the boy said. "You have the road." The eyes in the pit widened. A tendril of the black fog rose up from the depths. It moved like a cobra, swaying in the air, seeking heat. It lashed out, wrapping around my neck. It wasn't smoke. It was solid. It felt like wet velvet, slick and muscular. It tightened, cutting off my air. Then, it began to force its way into my mouth. I gagged, thrashing, trying to bite down, but the substance was intangible and solid all at once. It poured down my throat, tasting of oil and old pennies.
It wasn't suffocating me. It was filling me. I could feel it sliding into my stomach, expanding into my lungs, seeping into my bloodstream. It was ice cold. I felt my heart rate slow down, thumping heavily against the intrusion. Thump, thump, thump. "Accept it," the boy whispered. "It's easier if you don't fight. Let the water in." My vision began to blur. The purple light of the castle ruins grew brighter, shifting into a blinding violet. The whispers from the well grew louder, transforming into distinct sentences. "Cold down here. Help me. The truck is coming. Throw the coin." I was hearing them all, every victim, every lost soul, every terrified driver who had ever vanished on Clinton Road. Their memories were flooding into my brain, overwriting my own. I saw a family in a station wagon in 1972, screaming as they swerved into the trees. I saw a teenager in 1998, daring his friends to walk the bridge, only to be pulled under. I saw myself, 10 minutes ago, tossing that coin. "He is taking it," the boy announced to the darkness. "The transfer is beginning." The paralysis in my legs began to recede, replaced by a buzzing electric energy. But it wasn't my energy. It was the hum of the high-tension power lines that crisscrossed the forest. It was the static of a dead radio channel. I tried to scream, but the black fog choked the sound. Suddenly, a loud mechanical roar shattered the ritualistic trance. Room! The phantom truck at the tree line revved its engine again. Its high beams cut through the ruins, blindingly bright, illuminating the boy and me in a harsh interrogator spotlight. The boy flinched. He looked back at the truck with genuine fear. Not yet, he shrieked at the truck. He isn't ready. The truck didn't care. It roared again and lurched forward, smashing through the outer wall of the castle ruins. Stone exploded inward. The ground shook. The distraction broke the connection. The tendril of fog around my throat loosened just enough. I gasped, coughing up a spray of black bile. I rolled onto my side, retching, expelling the invading essence before it could take total root. You have to finish it, the boy screamed, grabbing my arm. You have to take my place. I want to go home. Go to hell, I rasped. I kicked out. My legs worked. The paralysis was gone, or at least suppressed by the sheer surge of adrenaline and the foreign energy coursing through me.
I didn't just kick. I lashed out with supernatural force. My boot connected with the boy's chest. There was a sickening crack, like stepping on a dry branch. The boy flew backward. He didn't just fall. He was launched across the clearing, slamming into the stone wall of the well with a wet thud. He slid down, leaving a smear of black slime on the stones. I scrambled to my feet. I felt dizzy, sick, and freezing, but I was standing. The truck was inside the ruins now. It was massive, a rusted behemoth of steel and hate. It idled 10 feet away, its grill dripping with mud and moss. I was trapped between the truck, the boy, and the well. But the boy wasn't moving. I looked at the well. The eyes were still there, watching, angry. The toll must be paid, the voice bellowed, one way or another. I looked at my car, crushed against the far wall. The engine was dead. I looked at the woods beyond the broken wall. Run, a voice in my head whispered. It wasn't the monster. It wasn't the boy. It was my own survival instinct, finally screaming louder than the horror. I turned and sprinted toward the gap in the wall where the truck had entered. I didn't look back at the boy. I didn't look back at the well. I ran into the black throat of the forest, the mud sucking at my shoes, the branches whipping my face. Behind me, the truck roared. It was coming.
The Chapter 7, The Juggernaut. The forest did not want me to leave. That was the only explanation for the way the undergrowth fought back. Vines that looked like rusted wire snagged my ankles. Low-hanging branches, stripped of leaves and sharp as switchblades, whipped across my face, slicing fresh lines of fire into my cheeks. The mud was no longer just wet earth. It was a suction cup, a hungry mouth trying to swallow my shoes with every desperate stride. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The sound behind me was the apocalypse in low gear. Crack, snap, roar. The phantom truck wasn't navigating the dense woods. It was bulldozing them. I could hear ancient oaks snapping like toothpicks, the sickening crunch of timber giving way to steel. The engine noise was a physical pressure against my back, a guttural, diesel-choked growl that vibrated in my teeth. I crested a small ridge and scrambled down the other side, sliding on a slurry of wet leaves and loose shale. My breath was coming in ragged, sobbing gasps. My lungs burned, not just from exertion, but from the residual chill of that black fog I had inhaled. Every exhale tasted of old pennies and stagnant wire. "Run, Michael." The whisper wasn't in my ear. It was in the center of my skull. It was the boy's voice, but stripped of its childish cadence. It sounded like static. "The collector doesn't like to share."
I stumbled, my knee slamming into a moss-covered rock. Pain shot up my leg, white-hot and blinding, but I forced myself up. To stop was to die. Worse than die, to become hollow. Behind me, the ridge I had just descended exploded in a halo of blinding white light. The truck crested the hill. It was massive. In the chaotic strobing of its high beams, I saw the silhouette of a beast made of iron and hate. It was an old pickup, maybe a Chevy or a Ford from the 70s, but it was wrong. The chassis sat too high. The tires were monstrous, churning the earth into a spray of black mud. The grille was a twisted maw of chrome that seemed to be grinning. It paused for a second at the top of the ridge, its light sweeping the valley below like the eye of a prison searchlight. Then, the beams locked onto me. The engine revved, a sound like a dying animal screaming in a canyon, and it plunged down the slope. I turned and sprinted. I ran blindly, arms pumping, chest heaving. The terrain was flattening out, the trees thinning slightly. I saw a gap in the canopy ahead.
A break in the black wall of the forest. The road. "Please," I wheezed, spit flying from my lips. "Just let me get to the road." I burst through the final line of brush, my feet hitting solid, flat ground. I was back on Clinton Road. But it wasn't the road I remembered. The asphalt was darker, slick with a sheen of oil that reflected the non-existent moon. The double yellow lines down the center weren't painted. They glowed with a faint sulfurous luminescence. And the silence was absolute. No wind, no distant highway hum, just the sound of my own heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked left, darkness. I looked right, darkness. A straight, infinite corridor of blacktop. Then, the tree line I had just exited erupted. The truck smashed through the brush, landing on the asphalt with a heavy, metallic thud that shook the ground beneath my feet. It skidded sideways, tires screeching, not the sound of rubber on road, but of metal on bone, before righting itself. It faced me, 50 yards away. The high beams were blinding, burning retinas, washing out the world until there was only white light and the silhouette of the cab. I backed away, my hands held up in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "What do you want?" I screamed. "I don't have anything left." The truck didn't move. It just idled, that low rumbling growl resonating in the wet air. Then the driver's side door creaked open. I froze. A figure stepped out. It wasn't the boy. It wasn't a man. It was a shadow. A tall, indistinct shape made of the same darkness that swallowed the sky. It wore a trucker's cap pulled low, and where its face should have been, there was only a void, a swirling, empty space where light went to die. It held something in its hand. A tire iron, rusted, jagged, dripping with something dark. The shadow figure took a step toward me. I turned and bolted across the asphalt. I didn't run down the road. I knew I couldn't outrun the truck on a straightaway. I ran for the structure.
It was my only cover, my only chance to break the line of sight. I scrambled up the muddy embankment, my fingers digging into the wet soil. The stone pyramid loomed above me, a monolith of dead industry. At its base was a dark, arched opening, the mouth of the furnace. I dove inside. The interior was cramped, smelling of wet stone, dead leaves, and ancient ash. I crawled to the back, pressing myself into the furthest corner, pulling my knees to my chest. I was shaking so violently my teeth clattered together. Outside, the truck engine roared again. I waited for the crash. I waited for the truck to ram the stone structure, to bring the heavy rocks down on top of me. But the crash didn't come. Instead, I heard heavy boots on the gravel. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Slow, deliberate. The shadow was coming on foot. I held my breath, tears streaming down my face. I patted my jacket pocket, looking for a weapon,
a pen, keys, anything. My fingers brushed against something cold and round. My heart stopped. I pulled it out. The quarter. The 1994 quarter. It was back. I stared at it in the gloom. It was clean, shining, mocking me. I had thrown it in the river. I had given it to the boy. But here it was. You can't pay a debt with the same money twice. The boy's voice whispered in my mind. But you can raise the stakes. The footsteps stopped right outside the archway of the furnace. A shadow fell across the opening, blocking out the dim light from the road. The figure was standing there. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its gaze. It felt like standing in front of an open blast furnace, a wave of hate so intense it blistered the air. The tire iron scraped against the stone wall. Scratch!
I pulled the phone out with trembling fingers. The screen was cracked, glowing with a bright, blinding white light. The caller ID didn't show a number. It read, "Unknown caller." But below that, in smaller letters, "Location, the bridge." The shadow stepped back, seemingly repelled by the light of the phone. I answered it. I didn't want to, but my thumb moved on its own. I put the phone to my ear. "Hello?" I whispered. Static. And then, a sound that made my blood freeze solid. It was the sound of my own voice. "Just proving it's nonsense," the voice on the phone said. Then the splash. Then the silence. Then my own voice again, but different, distorted. Screaming. "Help me! It's cold! It's so cold!" The call ended. The screen went black. But in the brief flash of light before it died, I saw something on the floor of the furnace, right next to my boot. It wasn't leaves. It was a pile of wallets. Dozens of them. Old leather, rotting fabric, covered in dust. And on top of the pile, a fresh one. Mine. The one the boy had taken. I looked up. The shadow was gone. The truck was idling on the road, its engine purring. But the driver's door was open, and the passenger door was open. It was waiting.
Chapter 8: The Iron Belly. The pile of wallets wasn't just a collection of lost property. It was a mass grave. I stared at them in the fading light of my dying phone screen. There were billfolds made of cracked alligator skin from the 50s, nylon Velcro wallets from the 80s, sleek leather card holders from last year. They were rotting, fused together by damp mold and time, a strata of sedimentary death. And mine sat on top, fresh, glistening with that black, oily water. I reached out to touch it, but my hand recoiled. To take it back felt like robbing a corpse. It felt like admitting that I belonged in this pile, that I was just another layer of debris to be forgotten in the stone gullet of the Clinton furnace. "Get in," the truck's engine growled. It wasn't a voice. It was the vibration of the pistons rattling the loose stones of the pyramid structure around me. I looked out the arched opening. The massive pickup truck sat on the road, idling with a predatory patience. Both doors hung open like the mandibles of a giant insect waiting for prey to wander into its mouth. The cabin light was on, a dim, sickly yellow dome light that illuminated nothing. The seats were empty. But the furnace behind me was changing. The temperature inside the stone structure began to rise. It wasn't the gradual warmth of a heater. It was the sudden, searing heat of a blast furnace igniting. The stone walls, cold and damp seconds ago, began to radiate an intense, blistering fever. The air shimmered. The smell of wet leaves vanished, replaced by the choking stench of sulfur and burning hair. I scrambled backward, hitting the rear wall, but the stone seared my jacket. I cried out, slapping at the fabric. The shadows in the corners of the pyramid began to detach themselves. They weren't just absences of light anymore. They were silhouettes. Men in flannel shirts, women in bell-bottoms, a child in a baseball uniform. They crowded around me, their faces blank slates of gray mist. They didn't speak. They just pushed. Dozens of gold, intangible hands shoved me toward the opening, toward the road, toward the truck. I stumbled out of the furnace, gasping for air that wasn't superheated. The night air of Clinton Road felt like ice water in my lungs. The truck revved again. Vroom. It was an ultimatum. Burn or ride. I looked at the dark woods. I knew what was out there. The boy, the well, the things that slid without walking. I looked at the truck. It was a trap.
I knew it was a trap. but it was a cage of steel and glass, a fortress compared to the exposed vulnerability of the asphalt. "Fine," I whispered, my voice broken. "Fine." I walked toward the passenger side. My legs felt heavy, as if the gravity of the road was increasing with every step. I climbed up onto the running board. It was rusted through in places, jagged metal biting into my shoe, and hauled myself into the cab. The door slammed shut the moment my butt hit the vinyl seat. Click. The lock engaged. I looked at the driver's seat. Empty. The steering wheel was massive, wrapped in cracked leather. The gear shift was a long chrome stalk rising from the floor. The dashboard was a confusion of analog dials, all of them dead, except for the speedometer, which glowed a faint radioactive green. "Who's driving?" I asked the empty cab. The radio sparked to life. There was no digital display, just an old-fashioned dial with a red needle. The needle began to sweep back and forth, hunting for a signal in the static. "Don't look back." A snippet of a 60s pop song. "Terminal." A weather report. "Michael." My mother's voice. I slammed my back against the door, gripping the handle. "Let me out." The gear shift clunked into drive with a violence that shook the entire frame. The gas pedal depressed all the way to the floor mat. The truck surged forward. We didn't just accelerate. We launched. The G-force pinned me to the seat. The trees outside became a single, smeared wall of gray. The speedometer needle whipped past 60, 80, 100. We were hurtling down Clinton Road faster than any car should be able to go on those twisting curves. But the truck didn't drift. It didn't skid. It turned with geometric precision, the steering wheel spinning wildly on its own. I stared out the windshield, mesmerized by the tunnel of high beams cutting through the dark. Then, the scenery began to change. We weren't just driving through space. We were driving through time. The trees flickered. 1 second they were bare, autumnal skeletons. The next they were lush with summer green. Then, buried in snow. Then gone entirely, replaced by saplings. And the road was populated. I saw them in the flashes of the headlights. A 1980s Camaro wrapped around a telephone pole, steam rising from the radiator. A girl was standing next to it, weeping blood. A horse-drawn carriage overturned in a ditch, the horses' skeletons gleaming white in the mud. A biker lying in the center of the lane, his helmet cracked open, staring at me as we roared over him. I squeezed my eyes shut. "Stop it. I don't want to see this." "You have to see," the radio buzzed. It was the boy's voice again, but deeper, distorted by the speakers. "You are the witness now." The truck swerved hard to the left. We were leaving the main road again. We were heading toward the water. Not the small brook under the bridge, the reservoir, the massive man-made lake that bordered the road, deep and dark and full of secrets. The truck smashed through a chain-link fence, the metal screaming as it tore. We were on a gravel service road now, bouncing violently. Ahead, the black expanse of the Clinton Reservoir stretched out like an ocean of ink. The moon had finally appeared, a sliver of pale bone hanging low over the water. The truck didn't slow down. "No," I gasped, realizing the trajectory. "No, no, no." We were heading straight for the boat launch, a concrete ramp disappearing into the black water. "Brake!" I screamed, lunging across the cab. I grabbed the wheel, trying to turn it, trying to steer us away from the water. The wheel was immovable. It was welded in place by an unseen force. I stomped on the brake pedal on the driver's side, jamming my foot down on top of the invisible foot that was pressing the gas. It did nothing. The pedal didn't budge. The water rushed toward us. Splash. The truck hit the reservoir at 80 miles an hour. The impact was like hitting a concrete wall. The windshield shattered, imploding into a million diamonds of safety glass. Water, freezing, crushing, black water, exploded into the cabin. The truck didn't float. It was too heavy. It sank like a stone. The headlights stayed on, cutting two bright cones through the murky depths. I held my breath, the cold shock seizing my chest. The water rose instantly to the roof. I fumbled for the door handle, pulling it, kicking it. Locked. I tried to roll down the window, stuck. The truck drifted downward, the nose tilting toward the silt bottom. Through the broken windshield, I could see the underwater world illuminated by the high beams. It wasn't empty. The bottom of the reservoir was a parking lot. Dozens of cars, rusting hulks half buried in the mud, a graveyard of chrome and steel. And floating above them, suspended in the water like marionettes with cut strings, were the drivers.
They drifted in the current, their clothes billowing, their skin pale and bloated. Their eyes were open. They were all looking at the truck. They were all looking at me. My lungs were burning. The instinct to inhale was becoming a physical agony. The radio, now submerged, bubbled one last message. "Welcome home, Michael." The truck hit the bottom with a muffled thud, kicking up a cloud of silt that obscured the headlights. Darkness. Suffocation. The end. But then, a tapping. Ting. Ting. I looked down. Floating in the water inside the cab, rising slowly from the floor mat toward my face. The coin. It glinted in the dying light of the dashboard. And as I watched, the face on the quarter changed. It wasn't George Washington anymore. It was me. My profile. My scream frozen in silver. My lungs gave out. I opened my mouth to scream, and the reservoir rushed in.
Chapter 9. The Cold Baptism. The instinct to breathe is a traitor. It screams at you, begging you to open your mouth, to inhale, even when you know the only thing waiting to enter your lungs is death. I held out for as long as I could. My chest was a cage of fire, my diaphragm spasms racking my body in violent, silent convulsions. The interior of the sunken truck was a tomb of murky green light, illuminated by the dying glow of the dashboard and the ghostly beams cutting through the silt outside. The coin floated before my eyes. It was spinning slowly in the suspension of the water, a tiny silver satellite orbiting my drowning face. The profile stamped into the metal was undeniable. It wasn't Washington. It was me. My jawline, my nose, my mouth frozen in an eternal scream. 1994. The date was gone, replaced by today's date. The boy's voice resonated through the water, not as sound, but as a vibration in the fluid that filled my ears. Accept the trade, Michael. Breathe it in. I looked past the coin, through the shattered windshield. The army of the dead, the drivers floating above their rusted wrecks, had drifted closer. They formed a silent circle around the truck, their pale limbs swaying in the current, their eyes white and expectant. They weren't attacking. They were waiting for the induction. My vision began to tunnel. Black spots danced at the edges of the green gloom. The hypoxia was setting in, bringing with it a strange, narcotic calm. "Just let go," a part of me whispered. "It's cold, but it's quiet." I opened my mouth. The water rushed in. It didn't feel like drowning. It felt like swallowing a glacier. The freezing liquid poured down my throat, filling my stomach, invading my lungs. But instead of the agonizing convulsion of drowning, I felt a sudden, terrifying clarity. The water didn't kill me. It connected me. In that moment, I became part of the reservoir. I felt the pressure of the depth, not as a weight, but as a blanket. I felt the slow, rotting decay of the leaves at the bottom. I felt the rusted metal of the cars, as if they were extensions of my own skin. And I felt him. The boy. He was sitting in the passenger seat of the truck. He hadn't been there a second ago. He wasn't floating. He was sitting perfectly still, anchored by the same unnatural gravity that held the truck to the lake bed. His hair waved gently in the water like seagrass. He looked at me, his black eyes wide and solemn. He reached out a hand.
In his palm sat the original quarter, the one I had thrown, the one that started this nightmare. "You paid the toll to cross," the boy's voice echoed in my mind. "But you have to pay the toll to leave." I looked at the coin. Then I looked at the one floating in front of my face, the one with my image. "One stays," the boy said. "One goes. That is the balance." He was offering me a choice, a horrific, impossible choice. Leave a part of myself here, my image, my soul, my peace, and take the physical token back to the surface. Or stay here, whole and dead, and let the coin return to the world without me. I was drowning, yet I was thinking faster than I ever had in my life. The survival instinct, dormant for the last minute, roared back to life with the ferocity of a wounded animal. I didn't want to die in a truck in West Milford. I didn't want to be a ghost story. I reached out. My hand moved through the water, sluggish and heavy. I ignored the coin with my face on it. I let it float there, drifting toward the boy. I grabbed the coin in his hand, the 1994 quarter. The cold, wet metal bit into my palm. The moment my skin touched it, the boy smiled. It was a sad, relieved smile. "Done," he whispered. He closed his hand over the coin with my face on it. Bang. The truck expelled me. It wasn't a swim. It was an ejection. The passenger door blew off its hinges with a concussion that rippled through the water. A massive bubble of air, stale, trapped air from the cabin, surged upward, carrying me with it. I shot toward the surface, tumbling through the dark water, past the floating cadavers who turned their heads to watch me go. Their eyes were no longer blank. They looked jealous. My lungs burned with a renewed, fiery agony. The magical connection was severed. I was drowning again. Kick, kick, kick. I thrashed toward the moonlight shimmering above. The pressure in my ears screamed. The darkness seemed to grab at my ankles, trying to pull me back down to the iron graveyard. My hand broke the surface. Then my head. I gasped. A jagged, tearing sound. I vomited water. Black, oily water,
spilling it back into the reservoir where it belonged. I coughed until I saw stars, flailing in the freezing lake, fighting to keep my head above the chop. I was alive. I spun around in the water, treading frantically, looking for the truck. The surface of the reservoir was calm. No bubbles, no debris, just the reflection of the moon on the black glass of the water.
The truck was gone. The boy was gone. I swam for the shore. It was only 20 yards away, but it felt like miles. My limbs were leaden, my clothes dragging me down. I clawed my way up the rocky embankment, collapsing onto the sharp gravel of the service road. I lay there for a long time, shivering violently, coughing up the last of the lake water. The cold air bit into my soaked clothes, turning them into icy armor. "I made it," I whispered, my voice a broken croak. "I made it out." I rolled onto my back and looked at the sky. The stars were out. The oppressive canopy of the forest seemed to have pulled back, allowing a glimpse of the heavens. I sat up, wiping the slime from my eyes. And then I saw it, parked on the service road, 10 feet away. My Honda Civic. It wasn't crushed. It wasn't in the ruins of the castle. It wasn't wrapped around a tree. It was sitting there, idling quietly. The headlights were on, cutting 2 steady beams through the night mist. The paint was scratched, covered in mud and leaves, but the car was whole. I stared at it, my brain unable to process the continuity error. I had seen it destroyed. I had been dragged out of it. But Clinton Road doesn't follow linear time. It loops. It folds. I stood up, my legs shaking so hard I nearly fell again. I walked toward the car. The driver's side door was unlocked. I opened it. The interior was warm. The heater was blasting. The smell of wet wool and rot was gone, replaced by the faint scent of my vanilla air freshener. But the seat, the driver's seat was soaking wet. Not from me. I hadn't sat down yet. It was already wet. A dark, saturated stain in the shape of a small body. And on the dashboard, right above the steering wheel, was a single muddy handprint. Small, 5 fingers, dragged slightly to the right, pointing toward the ignition. I hesitated. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to run, to walk to the highway, to never touch this machine again. But I was miles from civilization. The cold was already seeping into my core. Hypothermia was a certainty if I stayed out here. I climbed in. My wet clothes squelched against the seat. I gripped the steering wheel. It was sticky. I put the car in drive. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I swore to myself, right then and there, that I would never look in a rearview mirror again as long as I lived. I pulled away from the reservoir, the gravel crunching under my tires. I drove back up the surface road.
Through the torn fence and onto the asphalt of Clinton Road, I drove. I kept my eyes locked forward. The tunnel of headlights was my world. The radio was silent. 5 minutes passed. 10. The trees began to thin. The road straightened out. And then, ahead, a beautiful, impossible sight. A glow. Orange and yellow sodium lights. A gas station. Civilization. I let out a sob of relief. I pressed the gas pedal, desperate to reach that island of light. But just as the station came into full view, just as I was about to cross the invisible threshold leaving the woods,
Chapter 10: The Permanent Toll. The fluorescent lights of the gas station were violent. They buzzed with a frequency that felt like needles being driven into my optic nerves. I shielded my eyes, stumbling away from the car, the gravel crunching loudly under my sneakers. I was safe. I was out. I walked toward the glass doors, my legs feeling strangely light, as if the gravity of the earth had lessened its grip on me. I reached for the handle, leaving a smear of moisture on the metal. The bell chimed, a cheerful electronic ding-dong that sounded obscenely normal after the choir of the dead in the reservoir. The clerk was a young kid, maybe 20, with greasy hair and a name tag that read Kevin. He was scrolling on his phone, bored, detached. He didn't look up immediately. "Help me," I croaked. My voice sounded wrong, hollow, wet, like it was bubbling up through a pipe. Kevin looked up. His eyes went wide. The color drained from his face so fast it looked painful. He dropped his phone on the counter with a clatter. "Whoa, hey, are you okay, man?" I nodded, trying to force a smile, trying to look human. "Car trouble. Got lost. Fell in the creek." I walked toward the counter. I needed water. I needed coffee. I needed to hear another human voice tell me that ghosts aren't real. "Stay back," Kevin whispered, backing up until he hit the cigarette display. "Dude, you're messing up the floor." I looked down. I wasn't just dripping. I was pouring. A steady stream of black, viscous water was cascading off my clothes, pooling rapidly on the white linoleum. It smelled of deep rot, of ancient silt, of the thing that lives under the bridge. But here was the horror. I felt dry. I felt warm. I felt the dry, heated air of the store on my skin. I felt the friction of my dry socks in my shoes. "I'm fine," I said, reaching into my pocket. "I just need to make a call." I pulled out the quarter, the 1994 quarter, the one I had taken from the boy. I placed it on the counter. "Here," I said, "for the phone." Kevin stared at the coin. He didn't want to touch it. He reached out with a trembling hand, his fingers brushing the metal. He snatched his hand back with a yelp. "It's burning," he shouted, nursing his fingers. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I looked at the coin. It sat there innocent and silver. "It's just a quarter," I whispered. I looked past Kevin, to the security monitor hanging in the corner of the ceiling. It showed a grainy.
I saw the counter. I saw Kevin, terrified, pressed against the back wall. I saw the puddle of black water on the floor. But I didn't see me. There was no one standing in front of the counter. Just a wet footprint, and another, and a floating quarter sitting on the glass. The realization hit me with the force of the truck that had crushed me. I didn't escape. The Michael that drove into the woods, the Michael with a job, a life, a fear of death. He was still in the reservoir. He was floating in the cab of that sunken truck, his lungs full of silt, staring at a coin with his own screaming face on it. I wasn't Michael. I was the vessel. I was the emptiness that the road had filled. "You took my place," I whispered. The words weren't mine. They were the boy's. But now they made sense. He hadn't taken my place in the world. I had taken his place in the void. I looked at the glass door. My reflection was there, faint and translucent. It was me, but my eyes were solid black. And behind me in the reflection, standing just over my shoulder, was the boy. He was dry. He was clean. He was smiling. He raised a finger to his lips. Shh. He was free. He was attached to me, yes,
but he was riding in the driver's seat of my soul. I was the vehicle now. I was the bridge. I grabbed the quarter from the counter. "Sorry," I said to Kevin. My voice was a multitude of whispers now. "I have to go. The toll is paid." I turned and walked out. I didn't run. I didn't panic. I felt a strange, cold purpose settling over me. I got back into the Honda Civic, the car that shouldn't exist, the phantom chariot. I sat in the driver's seat. The water squelched beneath me, comforting now. I looked at the rearview mirror. Small handprints covered the rear glass from the inside, and the back seat was still wet. It would always be wet. I put the car in drive. I didn't head toward the highway. I didn't head toward home. I turned the wheel back toward the darkness, back toward the tree line where the pavement turned to nightmares, because I realized then that I couldn't leave. Not really. I could drive to California. I could drive to the moon. But the road would always be Clinton Road. Every strip of asphalt I touched would become a vein of that cursed forest. I never drove Clinton Road again. Not as a man. I drove it as a part of the architecture. But sometimes, late at night, when the moon is hidden and the fog rolls in,
I find myself on a highway I don't recognize. I see headlights approaching, a lonely driver, a skeptic, someone looking for a shortcut. My car radio turns on by itself, and I hear a coin drop inside the car, and I know it's time to collect, because the road is hungry, and I am its open mouth. The end.